On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with Clover, and Clover was in an abusive relationship with a conflict-loving firefighter. It's a story about being caught in the fog of chaos and how Clover used domestic violence agencies to help get herself and her family out safely. Clover is a true beacon of hope. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, a podcast that gives a voice to survivors of narcissistic abuse. I am Brandon Chadwick, but my friends call me Chad, and thanks for tuning in to this episode. So what is a narcissist, you may ask? Well, for the purposes of this podcast, we refer to a narcissist as anyone who has displayed a pattern of behavior that shows a limited capacity to appreciate others' perspectives. It is that simple. And now, before we get to our episode with Clover, I just wanted to thank everyone in the Narcissist Apocalypse community for listening to the show and sharing your thoughts by email, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. A big shout out to all our friends in our Narcissist Apocalypse Facebook support group for just being a great group of people. Also, a reminder, if you have not left, I did it 2 weeks in a row. I couldn't say that part. If you haven't left us a review on whatever podcast service you use, Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, CastBox, etc., leave us a 5-star written review as it helps out the show a lot when it comes to rankings. If you don't want to do a written review, just do a regular 5-star review. Now, the quickest way to be part of our show is if you want to read a letter to your narcissist and be part of our Letters to Our Narcissist compilation episode. We have a voicemail recorder on our website. To record, go to narcissistapocalypse.com. It's on the right side of the page, and it's always floating around. It's hard to miss. There's a button there that says Send Voicemail. Press it, and away you'll go. You can record up to 5 minutes, so if you need more than 5 minutes, record once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, as many times as you need. We're accumulating these letters for a volume 3 of that episode, so send in those voicemails. And if you want me or my old pal Melissa to read your letter instead, just send it to narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com and put Letters to My Narcissist in the subject line. Last thing, our new podcast, Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A, was supposed to be out last week, but we are a bit delayed by the Apple submission process. So next week, our first episode will hopefully be up. Or, let's go Apple. Let's get the people behind the scenes working here and get it going. Let's get our new podcast up. Our first episode, when it comes out, will be focused on scapegoats with Julie L. Hall, author of the book, The Narcissist in Your Life, Recognizing the Patterns and Learning to Break Free. I've read the book. It's a wonderful book. It's got some heavy praise from some big names too. So Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A will be out there as quick as possible. So let's say next Thursday, it'll probably be out. So next week when I do this podcast, I will be promoting the other podcast, if that makes any sense at all. I'm just rambling, and now it's time for me to get out of my own way. Here is my conversation with Clover. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, and with me today, I have Clover. How are you, Clover?
I'm doing well today. How are you?
I am good. As we discussed before, I have a little bit of a dry mouth problem. I don't know what's going on with me. I'm hoping that I don't disgust anyone out there today. But before
You're making me self-conscious about mine, too. So,
but before we begin, everyone, today we're going to hear a story about an ex who was a firefighter. This is the second story that we've had about a firefighter, and it seems to be a little bit of a theme maybe with people who are in these positions. So we're going to discuss that a little bit as we go on in this story, and I just want to thank you for sharing your story with us today, and I am going to get out of your way, and the floor is now yours.
Thanks, Brandon. Okay, so I'm going to start my story about 6-ish years ago. I was in my mid-30s and losing my mind. I had put myself in a position in my life that was extremely overwhelming and emotionally just unbearable. I had moved my ex-husband and my mom a couple of hours away with my 6 or 7-year-old son because my ex-husband had been in a car accident and had become disabled, and I was one of the only supports that he had to rehabilitate properly. My mom had come down with blood poisoning, was on life support, had complications after this illness, and needed me to take care of her. So I took on those massive caregiving roles, moved us away, was working as a social worker during the day in the child abuse arena. And at night, I was a juvenile probation tracker, so I was chasing teenage criminals at night, which led to like 16 and 18-hour work days in a county in our state that was number 1 ranked for meth. So massively stressful. And after about a year and a half of being in this situation, I kind of cracked. I kind of just really lost my mind. I ended up abandoning my ex-husband and my mom, and just giving up and moving back home with my son. And instead of facing the failure that I was feeling and the atrocities and horrors that I had witnessed in my job, instead of going to therapy and properly doing the work, I decided to just distract myself, numb myself, and I used men and I used sex and drinking as drugs to do this. And so I have
one question first, just to explain to people that your ex-husband who was living with you, your relationship had already ended, correct?
Yes, we had been divorced for a few years when this car accident had happened, and I decided to move back in, or to put him in my home and take care of him, because he wasn't rehabilitating properly, because he didn't have a proper support system. I felt tons of guilt because he wasn't able to parent our child, and he and I had a really good relationship. We were still friends. We were co-parenting our son very positively, and so I thought I could save him and his ability to parent and rehabilitate him while taking care of my mom and doing these super stressful jobs and parenting our child. And so he and I still to this day we're friendly and co-parent and have a civil, positive relationship. And, our number one priority is our child's best interest always. So when I had abandoned them, he had come from being in a wheelchair when I first had moved him into my home to walking with a cane and getting around and being able to take care of our son independently. So whenever I moved back home, he ended up coming back to the same town shortly after, moving close by. So my son spent a lot of time with his father too. And so when my son was at school or at his dad's, I was dating, I was drinking, I was just attracting all kinds of chaos into my life. And before this, I had been, quote unquote, normal middle class, regular behaving type of professional person. And I had just overwhelmed myself emotionally to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. And right after moving back home, my grandma, who had raised me through high school, not through my high school years, passed away. My mom found her dead on her apartment floor, suddenly, unexpectedly, early 70s. You know, she had no health problems. And so then just another massive emotional blow to me. So that day that my grandma died, I went to the bar, you know, as one that is drinking and distracting herself does, and met the person that this story is sort of centered around. He was a massive distraction, and I mean massive. He was a mountain of a man. He was 6'4", 320 pounds, like 4-foot shoulders, like just a giant dude, and very just vivacious and boisterous. He was loud and intense and dramatic and intimidating, kind of, and very, very inappropriate. And my best friend was with me at the time, and she, after we had spent some one-on-one time with him, she looked at me and she goes, "Oh my God, I think that dude is like a wife beater. Like, could you stay away from him?" And to me, he was entertaining. The drama was like intoxicating. His inappropriateness was, I have a sense of humor that I found it extremely engaging, and it's not something that I'm proud of looking back on it, but you know, he was a personification of the craziness and distraction that I needed at the time. And we started an insane relationship from the very beginning. Like, I was dating other people. He knew that I didn't want a relationship, and it was kind of like a challenge for him to get me to react to him at first. So I kind of lived two different lives. When my son was home, I was the ride our bikes, go to the pool, play Legos, focus, appropriate mother. And then when my son was gone, I was drinking, binge drinking. I was engaging in some really reckless and stupid situations where I would meet guys on dating apps and have strangers come to my house. I let this highly inappropriate and soon to find out abusive man kind of take over my life. So we had been, I jokingly use the term like booty call situation, for about 8 months. And during this 8 months, he started figuring out when I was home with my son, and he would show up drunk during those times because he knew that I was sober and that there wouldn't be another guy there, and that I would pacify him while my son was sleeping. Like, I wouldn't cause any trouble. I would feed him, have sex with him, and send him on his way. So he figured out, to get what he wanted, when to show up. Because if he showed up when I didn't have my son, I was likely to have another male there. I was likely to fight him away, to not want him around. And I remember one time, it was so insane that he took a knife and like cut my shirt open on my porch just for the shock value of it. Completely unwarranted, no warning, just pulled a knife out and cut my shirt open. And I'm standing on my front porch in town, and then left and he just did things to shock and get reactions. And
I know we probably will address this fully later in the show, but at the time, was the thought process of what was going on, what he was actually doing, was that something in your mind at all, that like this is his intention, like my son is home, this is what's going on, or is that not even close to your thought process at this time?
That I figured out that he was showing up whenever he could get me to quote unquote behave, and I did put that together, that he was showing up when my son was there. And then whenever I wanted to like go out to the bar and be crazy and get drunk and have fun and would invite him, he didn't want anything to do with me. So he started very early this pattern of opposites. And it is a theme throughout our entire relationship, throughout our marriage, and plays out with our later child and my son as well. So
when it comes to him being a firefighter, how much of a role did that play in your early relationship with being involved with him or letting it slide? Was it something that attracted you and we're like, oh, he's a firefighter, he must be a good guy?
Not really, not at first, because he was a volunteer on a small town fire department. Like, they rarely got called out. If they did, it was probably for a grass fire, you know. He just carried his gear in the back of his truck, and if he wasn't intoxicated, he showed up and hosed out a grass fire. Like, there was no heroism factoring into this time that he was being a firefighter. But interestingly, he would post on, the only time that he ever posted on social media were memes about how amazing and heroic firefighters are, right? And so guaranteed attention and likes. And so he very early had this predisposition to use being a firefighter as an attention getter and an ego feeder. And this gets worse later, because later in our marriage, he gets on a bigger department and kind of gets more involved in another fire department. So I will tell you more about that when we get to the point in our marriage when that happens. But first, so after the booty call situation, after 8 months of that happening, we had met at the end of March, and at the end of the summer, I remember telling him, I will not be doing this anymore. Like, all of this craziness, I've got to stop it. You're part of this craziness that I needed for the summer, and I'm done. It was Labor Day, and I went, Labor Day is the end of all of this. I will not see you again. And 2 months later, after not talking to him, he shows up at my house and never leaves. He, moved himself into my house. It was never discussed. He was not invited. Actually, I had told him I never wanted to see him again. So he was so inappropriate with my son. One of the first interactions that he had with my 8-year-old son was dropping MFer and CSer in my in my kitchen in front of my child, who had never heard those words. And just for the shock of it, he knew that my son had had a sheltered, normal life, and that would bother me, because one of his tactics and the motivation behind this opposite theme was to get me provoked to hysteria. And this is something that I didn't recognize until the very end. But he would do things like throw fits. Like, I used to tell people he was like a giant, out-of-control toddler with behavior problems. He would scream and cuss and rage and throw things and stomp and slam things as a way to get his way. I remember one of the very first times that I encountered this, I was part of my job training was I had to have so many hours of like continued education in a year. And so sometimes those required like overnight trips. And I had to take a 2-day trip for a training for work. And he lost his mind. And I had never encountered anything like this. And at this point, we were living together because finally I just agreed to a cohabitation after kind of not really having a choice. And he would throw fits about like the hours that I worked. He would throw fits about just any regulation at his job changing, or someone telling him something he didn't like, or me telling him he couldn't do something or have something. And he also, one of the major things that, looking back, I realized was a pattern, he would say like untrue, completely unsubstantiated, not in reality claims against me, which is projection. So I would become massively defensive and enraged. And a lot of the things at the time, they just made no sense. It was so confusing, his behavior and his claims and his accusations. And a lot of the things he would say, and like his words and his actions never matched. That's something I've since learned is very common with these kind of people. And I had never met anybody in my life that said things they didn't mean. All of the people that I had surrounded myself with, all of my family were genuine, authentic people. And so whenever he would say, I love you and I want to be a father to your son, and the most important thing to me in my whole life that I've wanted more than anything as a child, and these big dramatic claims and statements, I took them at face value. But then the things that he would do didn't match the words that he would say. And one of the things that he did, besides all of these false promises and false declarations, whenever we had been together about a year, living together about a year. No, not living together about a year, living together a few months, but was the next March. He proposed on his birthday. On the knee with the ring, the whole 9 yards, and had his parents there to take pictures, and told me that he did it on his birthday so that I would be his gift. Later put together, he saw me as a possession. At the time, thought it was the most romantic thing, right? So all of this stuff was happening to me primarily. It wasn't really happening around my son or to my son. And then one day, not long after he proposed, he always would tell me very negative things about my son that were not true. My son is very sensitive, very sweet, very forgiving and loving, very intelligent. And he would say things to me about my son that weren't true and get me hysterically defensive and angry. But he never, we kept kind of this two-life thing. We kept a lot of the chaos and drama away from my son. But one day, he got in my son's face. Keep in mind, he is a giant human being, and screamed at him that he needed his teeth knocked down his throat. My son had done nothing. It was all in, I don't know what to refer to him as. the mountain. It was all in his head. For whatever reason that he screamed at my son. And it was a Saturday night, and I went, that's it. I'm done. I will tolerate so much mistreatment to me, and I will not tolerate you mistreating my son. So by Monday, I had went back to my hometown because we had moved into his house. It was 20 minutes away. And so I went back to my hometown, put down deposit for another house. By that Friday, I had gathered a group of friends, and we, in secret, I did not tell him I was leaving. I don't know. At the time, I didn't have a reason why I wasn't telling him. I just knew I was scared of him, but didn't understand exactly why. My instinct, my gut said, just get out and don't tell him you're leaving. So while he was at work, I had planned all of this through the week. I got the house without him knowing. While he was at work on Friday, me and a crew of my friends moved a 3-bedroom home into a U-Haul and 2 pickups and got it 20 minutes away. And he had figured out while he was at work, because I had quit answering his phone calls. And one of the things that he used as an intimidation in our relationship always was he called and texted me incessantly. And if I did not answer him, he would get extremely angry and scream and cuss and threaten me. So I left the first time. I was gone 5 weeks, living on my own again with my son. I started drinking very heavily. I was having obsessive thoughts. I couldn't function from day to day. I put myself in therapy, but it's all I could think about, night and day. And it's all I could talk about. And now I understand that I was having withdrawals from, because I believe myself to be a love addict, and this, whenever you leave an abusive relationship, there are withdrawals, and I very clearly see that's what was happening to me. So I very desperately wanted him back, and very desperately wanted him to stay away from me at the same time. And after 5 weeks, he showed up on my porch. I don't know how he figured out where I was living, and begged me to take him back, came clean about all of the online affairs he had been having, and promised that the promises were so elaborate and dramatic and believable. He was, he pretended remorse like, an Oscar winner. I believed him. And it was all, complete, just pretend. It was all pretend, because after 4 months, he was right back to his abusive self. So, but I did take him back, and my son, I remember telling my son after a few weeks of seeing him and my son not knowing, my son yelled at me for the first time in his life. This is so stupid. We gave him a chance and he ruined it. What are you doing? And still didn't stop me because of that whole addict thing. So
how do you feel about that now? I'm sure it's a big source of hurt for you and shame. I guess maybe this is a bad time to discuss it, and maybe we'll discuss at the end of the episode. But at the time, were you thinking of anyone else's thought process, or was that not even, these kind of things were just like, I know what I'm doing, just we're going to get through this?
The amount of things that I logically knew were wrong with what I was doing, and the level of denial that I had because I have a massive savior complex. And so I thought I can make him a good person. I can show him the difference between right and wrong, and I can love him into being good to us. So I kind of dismissed my son's concerns and my very valid concerns about his behavior, and now he's promising to be a good person. And so, I did it. And then I got pregnant. So let me kind of go into this. So I didn't want any more children. I was very focused on my son, and so was my ex-husband. And I kind of felt like I wasn't really in a place to be having another child. So I had been very clear with this person. There's kind of a theme. I don't want a relationship with you. I never want to see you again. Now I don't want a child. And the thing he wants the most in the world now is a child. So, he had been, married previously. They had tried having a child. He had low fertility. I went with him to a doctor's appointment because I didn't trust him and did not want another child, and had the doctor, I listened to the doctor's voicemail from the test saying that the chances of him being able to have a child were next to nothing. So I took my birth control. I had permanent birth control in my arm. I took it out. And it was the first time that we had sex after my birth control was out and that I had ovulated that I got pregnant, because I had an undiagnosed health issue at the time. I had been having kidney stones, but not really any other symptoms. And what I had was called parahypothyroidism, which is a gland on your thyroid gland called the parathyroid. And when it gets wonky, it floods your body with calcium. Well, calcium aids in fertility. So, voila, only person on the planet he could procreate with was me. Because also this condition in women under 50 is unheard of as well. So, and then also come to find out this condition, I was being calcified. All of my organs were being calcified, including my brain. So it was affecting my cognition. So I don't know if it is true or not, but I like to use it as an excuse now that, like, you know, I had brain damage, and that's why I chose him as a partner. It was a combination of many things, obviously, but I do believe that was part of it.
Falling in love can be considered brain damage.
Amen.
I'm sure a lot of people out there aren't going to like that comment, but for some people, it is a brain, it is a problem. It's a brain
cause you to be blind.
Yeah.
Well, I do look back, and I was like, I couldn't do math in my head anymore. I would read a page of something and not have any idea what I read. And, I have a teaching degree, a 10-year history of being a professional social worker. I've since started my own behavioral mental health business. I have a brain. I just didn't have one then because it was calcified. It also caused me to almost die whenever I had my daughter, because my placenta calcified and fragmented inside of me, and I hemorrhaged almost to death. And then it caused massive health issues for my daughter as well. The fact that she survived the pregnancy in and of itself defies science. But then after she was born, 8 days after she was born, she started having metabolic seizures. She was put in the ICU, and we did round-the-clock blood draws and medications, and for months we were living in a extreme state of survival, in survival mode. And, I was still experiencing massive symptoms from my condition. She was born in October. Her system kind of regulated itself in December. So for 2 months, I was 24 hours a day with this child who was either screaming in pain because her issues caused bone pain, or in the hospital, or, my life was keeping this child alive. And that was it for those 2 months. And then after that, I had surgery and almost died after the surgery, was on life support. Come home from being on life support, my mom came and took care of my daughter, and he wasn't my husband at the time, but is currently. I'm in the process of a divorce. And he left me laying in bed for 3 days, almost 3 days, without feeding me, and I almost died again because he almost let me starve to death. So, and this is because he doesn't understand that I was not just an object to meet his needs, that I wasn't just his servant, that I actually had needs too, not just emotional needs or, that I actually required food. I don't think that he was capable of even understanding that. Just like a toddler doesn't understand that about their parent, because I believe that's where he functioned as a human being. Mm-hmm. So not only am I in survival mode now, living with my health issues, a baby with health issues, she then has attachment issues because of being in the hospital. So she requires night and day connection, attention, physical touch. I am just surviving to kind of rewire her brain, and I'm also homeschooling my son at this point. I'm starting a business with my best friend. We're starting a behavioral mental health agency. And I don't even have time to brush my hair some days. That's the level of time and attention I was giving myself. I would take a shower, and my daughter would scream to be being held. I would make dinner. I would have a phone call, any of those things. And she wanted me to hold her and be interacting with her, which I did to the point of just utter exhaustion with absolutely no help. My husband did not even recognize that it was happening. As long as he had dinner, he had sex, and he had me answering his text messages and phone calls, he didn't recognize anything that was needed in our home because I had it covered. I was doing it. And then after getting my surgery and my medications I started healing.
In this chaos, do you realize that it is chaos, or is this just normal, I guess, for you for after a while?
There wasn't any brain functioning happening. I was so sleep deprived that I was hallucinating. It was I understand why prisoners of war are sleep deprived. It was torture. And then my daughter hit. It was for 2 years. It was like that. So I don't have a lot of memories of exact things that happened. I do know the one time I tried to leave my daughter with my husband. She was a few months old, to go get a medical test. I took my son with me and left my few-month-old daughter with my husband, and he ended up calling me hysterical and screaming and angry at me, but it was because he didn't feel comfortable being alone with her. And I ended up canceling my, life and death medical testing to come home because I needed to rescue her from his incompetency. So she was never left alone with him. He didn't parent her ever at all. I mean, he may have changed a few diapers, but he's never put her to bed, given her a bath, done any kind of parenting whatsoever. And I didn't want him to do that.
So you're just surviving. You are just literally in this specific period right here.
I'm making sure my kids are fed,
yes.
that my house is taken care of, that my bills are paid, that my husband is, getting the attention that he's required to not be extremely verbally abusive to me and the children. And that's it. That's all that I am able to get done. And then, my surgery was in April. I didn't have a voice even until August because it's, so super close to your, larynx, your voice box. And that had been damaged in the surgery. So by August, I was starting to talk. I had identified another thyroid issue and gotten the medication that I needed for that and was starting to heal. So as I started healing, my cognition started coming back. So because I was also sleeping, my daughter had also started sleeping at this point. So it took a year and a half to get her to be able to sleep more than just fragmented pieces at a time. So, and I was the only one taking care of her. So I didn't get a full night's sleep for 2 years after she was born. And once I started sleeping, once I started healing, I started waking up to a fucking nightmare. My husband was provoking and antagonizing me. I bet almost on a daily basis, to the point where I would react so quickly because I was so tired and so worn down. I had zero self-control. So he would say something ridiculous to me about I'm not doing something well enough or correctly or good enough. And I would just lash out at him with, how dare you? Why are you so shitty to me? And shitty was a word that I used a lot. Whenever I was out, I always asked him, why are you being shitty? And then one day my daughter was 2.5 years old, standing in the kitchen, and I had just had an altercation with my husband upstairs. We come downstairs to the kitchen. She was she was out of control. Her behavior was so terrible. When my son was little, he was like an exemplary. He was an ideal toddler. I thought I was the best parent in the world. And then my daughter, because she lived in this chaos, her behavior reflected it. And so she had gotten in trouble. I had scolded her, and she had went, you don't like me because I'm shitty. I'm shitty. I'm shitty, she kept saying. And I went, oh my God, what am I doing? It was like a bucket of cold water on my face. It woke me up, and I went, that's it. I will stop reacting. And I started diving into educating myself on how to stop reacting, what was happening in my house. I read Psychopath Free, I read Out of the Fog, I read other books and watched YouTube videos. I started listening to podcasts about narcissism, introducing your podcast to me, and realized that I was in an abusive marriage, an abusive relationship, and my children were being affected. It just hit me when she said I'm shitty, that, oh, I'm doing this to my child, and that I have responsibility. And so I decided that I had to leave. And that was late last summer that this happened. So, yeah, my daughter was 2.5-ish. And then when I started not reacting to my husband, he started escalating his behavior. And it got to the point where one of the last things that he was doing to get a reaction, because he used to ignore my daughter intentionally. He would pretend to sleep in the morning while we were getting around, and she would be trying to interact with him, and it would send me into a rage. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you being shitty? And then I stopped reacting to that, and she stopped reacting to that. Whenever we would have less and less, I was able to control myself more and more, less and less, we would have these big blow-ups in the house. And she started escaping the room whenever it would happen, because he would pin me in rooms and provoke me. He trapped me in a closet recently. It's in my protection order, which is how I got out of my marriage, and showed me pictures of whenever we were first in our relationship and went, why aren't you like this anymore? What is wrong with you now? And that's the kind of stuff that he did to get me hysterical. And so constantly, he would put his arms, he would back me against a counter in the bathroom or kitchen and put an arm on each side of me and pin me. And he also used excessive physical affection. So when the opposite theme that I talked about, whenever we were first together, I wanted lots of attention and sex, like in a new relationship. He didn't want anything to do with either one of those things. He intentionally ignored me. He rejected sex all the time, declined sex all the time. At the end of our marriage, I didn't want him to touch me at all, let alone have sex with him. I had to be, for the last year and a half of our marriage, I had to be intoxicated to have sex with him. And he constantly touched me and kissed me, and I knew I had to do it or he was going to throw a fit. So he used intimidation to force sex a lot, which is, I think, very much a type of sexual assault, sexual abuse. I don't know if it's recognized as that. And so
he used essentially what's kind of going on here is he would look at, okay, you like this, I'm going to do the opposite behavior. And he would always do what would cause a fight. He's always trying to figure out what's going to cause a fight. And that is technically happening for how long was your relationship?
6 years.
6 years of him looking at, okay, you like this, I'm going to like that. She likes this, I'm going to do this instead.
So when I started educating myself and realizing this was happening, I started documenting when I wanted to leave. I started documenting his behavior, his lack of parenting, because I knew I was going to go through a custody battle. So daily, I started documenting all of this stuff, and it started clicking, man. The dots just started connecting. I saw that everything he was doing was intentional, and that when I stopped reacting, like I said, his behavior started escalating to get reactions out of me. And so one of the last things that he was doing was he was sleeping naked, uncovered, in potential view of my 13-year-old son. And that guaranteed made me lose my mind. It got to that point. I don't know where this would have ended up had I stayed with him, because he used the children as ammunition to get reactions out of me from the beginning. And I just didn't see what was happening until this last summer. So the fear of what this was going to become from him was just immense. And one of the largest motivators to leave. So then my next steps in leaving were I called the domestic violence hotline and just talked to a lady about what was happening in my home and what my husband was doing, and just got validated for the first time. Yes, this is abuse. And that was a major step, just a validation. So then, it was just more fuel to actually leave. So I got an advocate in my area, a domestic violence advocate in my area that just kind of held my hand through getting a protection order, because the trapping and pinning and blocking that my husband did to me was enough to get a protection order, because it's actually physical abuse. So, and I had no idea of that. I would have not known that I could do that without the domestic violence advocate. So what the protection order did was removed him from my home, made it so he could not contact me, made it so he had limited contact with my daughter, and did this all without me being involved. After I got the advocate and wrote up the order, I knew that I was taking a trip with my children for a homeschool event for my son. And so I had all of this lined up to that date of that trip, so that my husband wouldn't be suspicious of me taking the children and leaving. So that was November 20th, just a couple months ago. And before that happened, I went and got an attorney and had that protection order ready to be entered into the court the day that I left to go on this trip with my kids. So I had packed up. There were guns in our home because we live in a rural area, and everybody has a gun. So I had removed the guns from our home. I had taken birth certificates and Social Security cards and insurance papers, health insurance cards, all of those things, those important things, and packed them with the stuff that I was packing for the trip, so he wouldn't notice. I
can't say how important it was to remove the firearms from the home for anyone who's listening, who's in a situation like this. I've been reading recently a book called No Visible Bruises, and I guess one of the first things someone should do who's in these situations, especially if you are afraid of your spouse and you think that your spouse is capable of taking things to that type of level, removing weapons from your home like that is a priority. And I was like, did the advocacy agency tell you to do that, or did you do that on your own?
It isn't a protection order. It asks if there are firearms in the home. So that's just what gave me the idea to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. Plus, he had a spare set of house keys and car keys in his vehicle that I removed beforehand. I did a lot of just... He had never physically assaulted me. He had physically assaulted other people, men. I don't know that he ever physically assaulted a woman, but I knew that his entire ego was fed based on being a firefighter, and that his reputation in the community was very important to him, that he really wanted to appear as a normal person, and having a professional wife and a normal middle-class family with children was extremely important to his status in the community and maintaining his position on the fire department. And I knew that leaving him and putting in this protection order and accusing him of domestic violence was going to possibly put my life and my children's lives in danger. And so I took, with the help of my advocate and my attorney, I took the precautions necessary. And that's sort of the message that I have and the point of me doing this podcast. Like I said to you before the recording, that I'm going to spend the rest of my day in an anxiety spiral, because talking, rehashing this story just triggers every single emotion. And so I scheduled a therapy session for directly after recording. So to hopefully get myself off the edge, but I've kind of made a list of things that I think are important advice for women that are wanting to leave, that you have to reach out to professionals. That I know my husband's brother is the same person as my brother or my husband, and his wife left him with 3 young children. She just left one day, and he has like shared custody of those kids. He has full access to her and is still continuing to abuse her a year later because she didn't take any of these precautions. And was incredibly abused afterwards, directly after leaving, by his family, too. His family is enablers and enmeshed and a whole other story. So reach out to professionals. Have them help you, because I believe me and know and relate to the amount of fog that you're in. I couldn't make a decision. I couldn't think clearly because of the gaslighting that had happened to me. I was so just indecisive and unable to understand what was happening and connect dots and have thoughts. And these professionals know what's happening to you, and they know the advice to give you. And they've through like domestic violence agencies, they've been through it themselves. So the first step is to reach out. And the second step is, when you decide to leave, to keep it a secret. That I know that this was outside of my character, that I am a very open person and very honest, and the stuff that I started doing in secret was uncomfortable to me at first. And I did tell one close friend and 2 family members that I was doing it and that it was going to happen, and outside of that, it was completely in secret. To educate yourself about what you're dealing with, whether it's physical abuse or emotional abuse, about the abuse cycle, and how there's a honeymoon period in between incidents of abuse, and how that's a beautiful time, and that you'll think everything is better, and it's not. And how to get a protection order. You know, learn what your laws are in your state. I took my children 2 hours away for a couple of days, and the police did all of the work for me. They came to my house and they told him he had 20 minutes to get his clothes and any possessions that were work related and get out of my house, and he would be arrested if he came back. And then he was served divorce papers. And after telling him goodbye that day, I took my children and left, and it's been over a couple of months. I have had 0 contact with him because of a protection order, which also gives you the time and the space to become clear-headed and realize the work that you have to do to save yourself from these abusive situations. Also document and record things. Let me tell you, I have a couple of audio recordings that have been lifesavers, because if you're a love addict or if you're a codependent and you leave an abusive relationship, you want to go back desperately at the beginning. And I have been in that situation and doubting all of my choices, and then listened to the recordings that I took. I have 2 20-minute recordings, and in those conversations is all of the lying and the projecting and the word salad and the playing dumb and the exaggerated claims and the, provoking me to hysteria. All of that stuff is in the recordings, and it sets my mind straight again. So not just for like any potential court or whatever, just for yourself to remember what actually was happening. And then if you can, hide money, hide important papers, get an attorney, take the precautions that are needed because whenever you leave is the most dangerous time, and there can be things that can be done. There are things that can be done to make it a little bit safer for you, and especially if you have children.
And how are your children doing now that you have left, and I guess there's with the protection order going on?
So my daughter has very limited contact with her father, and it has to be third-party pickup. So his grandma comes here and picks her up on Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she sees him for 4 hours, and he has been inconsistent with those visits. They've primarily been with his family, and he's not really, I think he's had a couple of hours of one-on-one time with her from the, she is extremely articulate and, able to kind of tell me, like on her visit with him where they celebrated Christmas, he had worked at the fire department the night before, and she said, Dad went to bed and I had Christmas with Grandma and Grandpa. So he's wholly uninterested, it seems like. But her behavior went from being so irrational and hysterical and out of control, almost like objectional, defiant level, to within 6 weeks, that child was normal. She was self-soothing whenever she was getting upset, even at night, which she was completely unable to do 6 weeks before that. She has moved into a regular bed from a crib, which I thought was going to be a complete nightmare because she wanted me in the night so much. She doesn't even get up, or like, it's so smooth. We go out to meals and she sits still and talks and just is peaceful. And it is the biggest reason that I don't doubt I made the right choice. Is the dramatic difference in her behavior, and all of my family, everyone that interacts with her has noticed how dramatic it is. And my 13-year-old son was almost completely emotionally shut down. I had put him in therapy. That's another thing I did when I chose to leave, was secretly start going to therapy and I put my son in therapy. And he has become like, a mouthy, funky, like, teenager. He like talks back, and he does dumb things. Like last night he dumped milk in his baggie of peanut butter crackers. I'm like, what the hell? And he's like, it's good. Like just stuff he never had the space to do before. Just innocent teenage behavior that he's now
he got his voice
free
back.
to have. Yeah. So
so here's the biggest question. How are you?
My shitty days are less shitty. So my worst days are less worse. Which is the thing that I'm the most grateful for. Like some days, when I'm really busy with work and my kids, I don't have sadness and emotions and sort of overwhelming feelings until my kids go to bed, and there's that space between them going to bed and me going to bed. That's the hardest. But day-to-day wise, it's really rough. It's only been a couple of months. But my worst days are less worse. And that's where I'm at right now. The loneliness is crushing. The struggle, the feelings of shame over the choices that I made that led to this, the lack of protective kind of capacity that I had for my children, it's crushing. And I'm in therapy, and I'm doing things like this to survive and get to a place where this doesn't make me bitter. It doesn't make me, because this, for me, made me realize that just the extent of cruelty in other human beings. I'd never experienced it. I'd worked in homes with child abusers for 10 years and hadn't realized that there are people that won't choose good if even when they know the difference between good and bad. My naivety was just through the roof. And so this has been like an existential heartbreak. This has been a realization of evil that I hadn't had before. And so it's even bigger than just a divorce and just an abused woman. And it's realizing that this is in the world and coming to terms with that also. I'd say that's probably my biggest issue.
Well, I know you probably don't think this, but, you know, I've been listening to your story now for over an hour, and I've talked to you before, and you're a good person coming into this. You've taken care of people for so long, and you might think that some of the things you've done have shame or guilt attached to them, but they don't. You know, you were trying to take care of your own needs at a certain point, in my mind, and, you know, one wrong turn turned into this, and it kind of overtook everything. But if you really look at who you are a loving, giving, generous person, and going forward, I think you're going to become an even more loving, generous person, because I have a feeling is going to take you into the realm of being an advocate for people, and being a bigger part of people's lives and changing people's lives on top of that. So even though this situation was terrible and everything that happened, you know, had a lot of things attached to it, in my mind, I can already see it, that you're going to become this beacon, I think, for people, because, you know, there's just something in the way you talk and the way you're able to communicate and share your story where I feel that that's going to happen for you. And I just want you to know that everything is you're just good. And, you know, you're a loving, good parent, mom. You were a good wife to someone who didn't deserve it. You know, and you're a good daughter as well. And I just, you know, if you haven't heard that, you should know it.
I don't know how to respond without breaking down to that, because, you know, everything that I've read about recovering from this says be kind to yourself. And those are words I never would have said to myself or couldn't say to myself. So thank you very much for that. And I want to have more reverence for those abilities. But now that I recognize that there are people walking among us that don't have those abilities, that's my goal, is to appreciate and value those in myself more. So thank you for recognizing them and saying that.
Because there are a lot of people in these situations where, because I've gotten emails from them before, where I've given them information to go to like a domestic violence agency and things along those lines, and they don't have any hope. and they're strong for staying in their situations. And, I'm trying to understand more about domestic violence as time has gone on, and just the way you are and who you are. Hopefully, when you're ready to do it, you'll be hopefully a beacon for those people that don't think that they have that ability to leave, because there is the strength in you, and I can hear it, and I think everyone out here can hear it today too.
Well, and like I said, that was my purpose of doing this podcast, is to try and get, if I can help one person leave safer, then, it's worth being vulnerable like this, and putting myself out there and putting my story out there so early when I'm so raw. And that's immediately my goal, is being a hand up. It always has been. That's where I operate from. I always have operated from there. And one of the reasons that I think that I have love addiction is my mom has borderline, and I've dealt with needing to help since I was first able to. And so a lot of times you hear, these narcissists or psychopaths or whatever are victims because they were abused. Well, some of us were abused and became helpers. And some of us become so arrogant in our ability to help that we attract psychopaths too. So, there's got to be a balance. There's got to be the desire to help and the ability to identify these people and stay the hell away from them.
So before we end off our show, do you have any final words before you end up going to your therapy appointment?
I didn't think I could leave either. Between the time of realizing I wanted to leave and actually leaving was the weakest, craziest, I had panic attacks and anxiety night and day. I also, as a tool, besides all the things I listed before, I went and got anxiety medication for the first time in my life. But you can leave. It doesn't matter how much you doubt yourself and how much you blame yourself and how insane and ashamed. It's one step at a time. It's one phone call for help at a time. It's, it's possible you can. And there are people out there to help you. And also, there is legislation that's in jeopardy right now. The Violence Against Women Act. Reach out to your legislators and your Congress people and demand that this gets renewed, because it is one of the things that provides funding for domestic violence agencies, that makes laws where boyfriends are just as guilty of domestic violence as husbands and things like that. Look into it and reach out. And that's an aside. Sorry, it just popped into my head. That strength comes afterwards as well. Just a few weeks, just a couple of months. It was worth leaving. It was worth it. It was worth mustering every bit of courage and strength that I possibly could and reaching out and doing it, because peace and hope are on the other side of it.
Well, Clover, thank you for being part of the show today. I know you're going to change people's lives from being on this show. And
it was an honor, Brandon. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And for everyone out there who is listening, we both hope you have a good night.